webcast started, but it doesn't anymore. So I'm just going to assume it started. Hi, this is the front-end web development class. My name is Jeffrey. We're going to start on a little recap and setup period. Important thing for this class is to make sure that you can install HARP. The usual setup, obviously, up to your web browser, get a text editor, but also go ahead and follow these instructions. Go ahead and install Node.js if you haven't done that, and then go ahead and run npm install -gharp or sudo npm install -gharp if necessary. So that is the thing to do. Shouldn't take very long. It also might throw a bunch of errors, or not errors, but warnings, deprecation notices as you install. Just ignore them. They're not your fault, or nothing you can do about it. So yeah, that's it. The reason we're using HARP is because it is a very extremely low effort web server. It essentially turns any folder into a web server and also preprocesses all of your CSS, JavaScript, HTML preprocessor files, Sass, EJS, CoffeeScript, not Babel, but probably soon, stuff like that. So yeah, that'll make our job a little easier as we go through the development of our site. Okay, what else? Other than that, all I really have to do is just talk about what we talked about in our previous weeks. We talked about CSS3, media queries, different sorts of modern stuff last week, and I kind of got cut short just because things went for longer than I thought they would. But yeah, we can go ahead and just take a look at what we did last week. The important thing, the relevant for this week mostly, is just talking about responsiveness, because for a first time in this class, I've been working off of this mock-up that we're going to see in half an hour for a number of years, for like 4 years now. And 4 years ago when I designed it, the web was mostly desktop or laptop or whatever. Now the web is mostly mobile, and we should be making mobile-first sites, and so I created a mobile version of it. And so throughout this week and the next, we're going to start with the mobile one and then make it responsive and kind of stretch to the original design I made a while ago. So that's the idea. Okay, anyway, as part of the regular setup steps for this class, you should have gotten the class materials. If you already have the materials, cd into the FWD directory and run git pull to update your copy to the latest version. This should download all of the materials from last week. If you don't have it, then run this command, git clone fwd.git. If you don't know how to do that by this point, well, you should probably learn, but you can go to the FWD repository. It's jeffreyhw/fwd. You go ahead and press this big green clone or download button, and go ahead and just download the zip file, or clone it if you know how to do that. Yeah, so that's the idea. And so let's go ahead and find it and see what we did. The materials for last week are found in Series 9, Class 17. So if we open up index.html in Series 9, Class 17, I realized that kind of caused a problem. Something I didn't fix last week is that this menu no longer appears in full resolution. But interestingly enough, when I click this and then make the screen bigger, oh no, that makes it worse. Well, whatever. So let's talk about what we did specifically. We started off, more or less, with this site. We had this 2-column blog with the nav wasn't empty, but we broke that, and then the header, and then we've got a little footer at the bottom with the sitemap, and a sidebar and a side that is on the right. Yeah, so this is kind of a common layout that you probably see on some sort of blog-based thing. What we did was we made it so at a certain resolution, specifically this width right here, this screen, go any further, and all of a sudden, there we go. All of a sudden, it turns into this. So it snaps from that to that. This weird hamburger-looking thing shows up. Everything here goes into a single column. So that is cool. That is a feature of CSS. CSS has a feature called the media query. That, when written, allows us to change how certain things are rendered on the page depending on the media that you are viewing your site in. By media, I mean whether you're currently viewing it on a screen versus whether you're currently viewing it printed out. So you can create a media query so certain things look different if you print the page out using a printer. But more importantly and more commonly, people use media queries to enable or disable certain CSS rules based on the width of their screen. They can say that at a minimum width of 600, that is to say at 600 or above, certain CSS rules will apply. And that's what we're doing in this case. Not 600, more like 980 or something. Let's find out. Let's go ahead and open our developer tools, these nice developer tools that we should usually have open. Let's stretch this out a little bit. So I have these developer tools docked to the right, which is a really good way of using it when you're testing out media queries, because you can just make the developer tools wider or narrower, based on how they work. It's funny, even the developer tools themselves are a little responsive. You'll notice that right here, the sidebar becomes the footer, so because it has enough space to do that. Actually, that's kind of backwards. No, it's not. Whatever. Okay. Anyway, so right, what's happening here is right here. Let me make this a little smaller so we can read it. Where are we? Oh yeah, max width 920. What changes? Let's say this. Let's go inside the wrapper here and take a look at our article. Our article is floated to the left and has a width of 680 pixels, but only at a media query of screen and min width 960. That is to say, if the window is 960 pixels wide or more, you'll see a little in the upper right. You see a little measurement that's going on here. At 960, it changes from this to that. So what we're saying is that by default, the page looks like this. But if you go over this width, then it starts to look like this. This is called mobile-first design, where you write your CSS to assume initially that the page is supposed to be rendered on a mobile display, or a display of less than 960, if you will. But you could also do desktop first, where essentially you flip the rule, and instead of saying min width 960, you can say max width 959, and then put all of the stuff that makes things single column or whatever else in those media queries, and then make this the default. It's really up to you. It works the exact same way. But I would say just because we're looking into the future, we should be developing mobile sites. So having the widescreen, sort of conditional stuff put aside is probably the nicer way of doing things nowadays. Okay, so what else is going on? Both of these things are floated to the left only if we've got a min width 960. Both of them have an explicit width, like 680 and 180, only if we're at 960 or above. Otherwise, they just don't have those measurements at all. This guy's got a margin top, this and that. At a larger screen, it no longer has a margin top, or at least this aside no longer has a margin top. There's a margin left of 20, which distances this guy away from that. So we've got that little orange area between the main content, the article content and the aside. But under that, all of a sudden this aside drops down, and it doesn't need any left margin because it's already just being pushed as far as it needs to go by the padding of the page. So all it really needs is margin on the top and the bottom, which pushes it away from what is now above it rather than to the left of it. So yeah, just some slight properties change around. What else is there? The more interesting stuff was what we did here. We've got this strange looking hamburger thing. Of course, you've seen better looking hamburgers. We call the people in the industry, as far as I can tell, really do call them hamburger menus. And you'll see them on many mobile sites. The one that I showed last week was, actually, it's funny. I just opened up a new tab, and there's the icon right there. In the upper left corner, there's that hamburger menu. And it turns into a grid when I hover over it. That's cool. Anyway, yeah, so here's another company that does this. I actually did the code for this page. Lab Zero sort of threw me on this project for a few weeks. So As you can see, it's got a menu up at the top here. But once you get below, what, I don't know, 780, at 780, it turns into a hamburger. And now that it's a hamburger, it has some functionality that clicking it makes this entire thing open. So the cool thing about this is that only a single class is added to the entire document when you click this menu hamburger thing. Even though it seems like a lot of stuff is moving around, the entire back, like this entire back page is shifted off to the side a little bit. This whole menu shifts to the left and appears. But the only thing that's really changing in our HTML, or that is to say in our DOM, is that this menu gets added a class of menu open. I'm sorry, the body gets a class of menu open, and then it's turned off. So it's extremely simple code. It's just like maybe 2 lines of code. On click of this thing, body.add class, menu open. So we've got similar stuff here, actually. When you click this weird-looking hamburger thing, that thing pops out. What happens here is, as you can see, the HTML gets a class of show nav. And if we had a close button, then it would also be able to close it. But instead, I just reload the page to take it away. The code, the JavaScript behind that, is very simple. It looks like this. Don't even worry about lines 1 and 5. If you've got the script loaded in the correct place, which is the bottom of the body, you never have to wrap this thing in some sort of little document.ready jQuery listener thing. But the relevant code is right here. When you click the H1 inside the top nav, find the HTML element and toggle the class of show nav on it. Right? Makes sense. So just turn it on and off whenever you click this hamburger. Of course, you can't access the hamburger because all of a sudden it's behind this big black darkness. Right? So, but what else happens? How does this thing slide over to the left? Why is it taking up the entire width of the page? How is it not? How are these icons, or these items, so nice and evenly distributed throughout the page? Well, let's answer all those questions. First one, let's talk about taking up the entire page. This is actually quite straightforward. We are using what we learned about a few weeks ago, positioning. Specifically, we're using fixed positioning. Fixed positioning makes it so an element can appear on the page, and you can anchor it to not a certain part of the document, but an actual part of the window. So that is to say, no matter if you're scrolling up and down, no matter where you currently are on the page, scrolled up or down or whatever, this, I can even try to scroll and nothing will really happen. It'll just stay put, despite the kind of funny elastic scrolling thing or momentum scrolling that macOS has. But anyway, the idea is that this whole thing is fixed. So it's on top of everything. It does not move when you scroll the page. It stays put. And we also give it a top, right, bottom, left of 0, which means it stretches to all 4 edges of the space that it's trying to take up, which is the window, right? But, okay, so next, let's talk about this display flex. These items seem evenly distributed from one another. For example, this about has a certain amount of space on top. It has twice that amount of space between about and projects, same amount between projects and links, same amount between links and contact, and then half that amount underneath contact, right? So that is done using display flex along with, what are we looking at? Flex direction, where is that coming from? Oh, here we go. Flex direction column. Just that just makes it so it goes from top to bottom. Justify content space around means we are distributing the content evenly throughout the box by putting the same sort of space around each item, right? Same space on top and bottom. Now let's that's pretty much flex. That's how we're using flex to distribute these things, no matter how tall or narrow the page is. See? So looks nice, distributes as you'd expect. Okay. Next up, transform, translate x 0. What is transforming? What is translation? Well, let's start here. The top nav UL is currently on the page. It has all these rules applied. It doesn't have a display of none. So it's there, but it doesn't seem to be visible. Why is that? Because it has a transform of translate x 100%. Translate x 100% is very much like saying position or left 100%. Like if you were using position absolute or position relative even, if you said left 100%, it would move it 100% from something, 100% from whatever it's contained in or whatever like that. So why do we use transform instead? Because transform allows us to use, I said this last week, the GPU instead of the CPU. It allows for better rendering, and when you move something around using the transform property, it doesn't have to re-lay out the entire page. Every time that something on the page is rendered, the browser, every time that something on the document is changed, the browser needs to compute the new layout of everything. If a certain height is taller or shorter, or content changes or anything like that, it could affect how everything underneath it is stacked. So that requires a layout, which is a lot of math. The height of every single element on the page needs to be recalculated, and then every single thing on the page needs to be repainted. So the math needs to happen, and then the actual illustration, the actual painting needs to occur. When you change something using transform, that relayout step does not have to occur, because all you're doing is simply affecting how it gets repainted. So that's a lot more efficient. It it means that if you were to, for example, animate this transform property, it wouldn't slow down the entire page with going, okay, step one, it's moving a little bit, moving a little bit, moving a little bit. Time for me to relayout, 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 relayout over and over and over. That's a lot of math, a lot of unnecessary stuff happening that does not have to happen, especially with a fixed element that doesn't affect the positioning of anything else on the page. So by using transform, we can make much more efficient, smoother animations and just paintings on the page. So along with transform, or along with whatever property we want to animate, we're using the transition property. The transition property says that it's going to list out as many properties as we like transform, for example. We're saying that if the transform value changes, that it's going to take 0.5 seconds to transition from the initial state to the end state. And it's going to do that using an easing matrix that looks like this, or an easing curve that looks like this. You see that ball going from left to right, how it kind of slows down at the end, or it even actually sort of speeds up in the beginning and then slows down at the end. That easing curve has a name. It's called ease. And you can use a whole bunch of pre-built easing Bezier curves to determine the animation of your transitions. Or you can create your own. You can actually generate your own Bezier curve. Just kind of go like that, and it generates it for you. It's called the cubic Bezier function. It's pretty cool. Anyway, we're specifying that the transform property, if changed, will take 5 seconds to change from one to the other. So what happens when we click this hamburger guy is that the transform property is now crossed out, because when shown, the transform is now translate x 0. So no longer is it translated 100% off the side of the page, it's translated 0 off the side of the page, meaning translation essentially turns off, and it took 0.5 seconds to go from step 1 to step 2 to step 2. So that's how we got that really neat transition happening when you click something. We didn't need to use any JavaScript to animate this transition. Before CSS transitions and animations came along, people had to use JavaScript. Specifically, they used the animate function in jQuery, which still exists, to be able to move one element from one to the other. But that was very inefficient because it required a JavaScript interval, a loop, essentially, that would have to run every so-and-so milliseconds to determine the new position of the thing, position on the page, have the entire page relay out and then repaint itself. Very inefficient. In fact, before it was actually set in stone what the refresh rate of a browser window was, oftentimes this interval in JavaScript that would have to relay out stuff on the page happened more than, I think it's more than 16 milliseconds, more than every 16 milliseconds. And I think 1 second divided by 16, that's 16 milliseconds, that's something like 60 frames a second. I'm not doing my math correctly, but the idea is that it would try to refresh at more than 60 hertz, and that is faster than most displays actually refresh themselves. So it would pretty much result in a whole bunch of wasted computations, wasted layouts, wasted paints, stuff that you weren't actually seeing. So there's a whole concept of the animation frame where you can actually determine when the next animation frame is going to happen. This is something I didn't talk about in the previous class. It's kind of in low level stuff. But anyway, yeah, you could do that in JavaScript. jQuery did not do that for a while, so it resulted in very inefficient animations. But it's still very inefficient compared to this transition, which, written with a few lines of CSS, is as efficient as possible, does what, is written the way you want the browser to do it, and makes your animations nice and brisk and whatever else. Yeah, so you get cool stuff like this.
So what are the most popular transform operations that you want to do?
I don't know. Height, width, transform, color, background color. There's a whole lot of stuff that you can transition or whatever else. Last week we saw that if you wanted to open this, the background color could transform from red to blue or something. Let me think of a good example. I don't know, opacity as well. Like here's an example. I made this site back in 2012, and there's a lot of CSS transitions going along here. This is not as efficient because it does actually affect the positioning rather than the transition. Because back in 2012, transform. A lot of trans stuff going on. But it would affect it wouldn't affect the transform because I didn't really think that browsers would be able to do that back then as widespread as position absolute. So instead, I'm doing a lot of position stuff. At least I think I am. Let me just double check that I'm not. Yeah, see, I've got position absolute, and when hovered over, if I were to hover over this guy, let me add an active state of hover, then the idea is that all of a sudden, this div has a height of 456. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not animating position. I'm actually animating height. So it goes from a height of this tall to a height of that tall. Also, as you can kind of see, text underneath how we do it fades in as it moves up. So that's a little opacity thing going on. This paragraph here sort of goes from nothing to display. It's a very subtle effect, but that's another thing you can do. When you click on this projects guy, this little active indicator moves and also changes its width depending on how big. See how who we are is wider than, say, people? So look how wide this indicator is here. Look how wide it gets when it moves over here. See, it gets a little bit wider. So it both moves and gets larger. Also, of course, as you move from one section to the other, the entire page switches over. So that's another little transitioning effect from left to right. And then there's this. That's a thing too. That's a rotation animation. That's not actually a transition since it doesn't have something that triggers it. It just keeps going. So the difference between a keyframe animation in JavaScript, in CSS, and a transition is that you can give something an animation property, which refers to a set of keyframes that you can define. And keyframes, if you're familiar with animation, are simply saying at point 0 of this animation, something should look like this. At point 50% of this animation, something should have changed. At point 100%, it should go back to the way it was or something. So I'm using a little keyframe animation to say that this guy, if it rotates long enough, is going to, I think after 10 seconds, it's going to make a full rotation. So I'm simply using a transform property of rotate and just having it go like that. And eventually, it will complete a full rotation, and then something else weird will happen on the page, which will happen in just a few seconds. Just give it a second. Where is it? Where is it? Where's my guy? Did we turn it off? Did we think that it was too silly? Wait, oh no, where'd it go? Did I hide it at a certain media query or something? Oh man, I have to consult my guys because.
Something in the middle, higher us.
Yes, there we go. That's it. Yeah. Essentially, if you hover over this guy for long enough, there's a big little Easter egg that appears. But I'm not sure why it's not showing up on my page. It might be that my window is too small in resolution. Anyway, that's funny stuff. So this is a page that uses a lot of CSS transitions. He also uses a whole bunch of other CSS things. Certain boxes here have very subtle shadows on them. This header has a shadow on it. That's something I didn't even get to last week. It's called box shadow. You can apply it to any box on the page, and it will just give a nice little drop shadow on it. You can also do text shadow, which kind of does the exact same thing, but just for the text content rather than the boxes. What else does this page have? This is an SVG. That's not really CSS at all. Scalable vector graphic. This thing kind of opens up. This animation where things push to the side or whatever is actually not possible with CSS. So this is using a library called Isotope that allows certain elements on the page to sort of make way for other elements. So when I click this guy, I make a call to this JavaScript library called Isotope that sort of moves things out of the way, which is kind of neat. So it doesn't really use any special CSS positioning, whatever. Yeah, so if you're looking, it's called Isotope. It's by this guy on Metaphysi. And as you can see here, you can change items around and resort them and do cool stuff. But that's JavaScript. That's not possible with just plain CSS. So that's why we use a library for fancy stuff like that. Yeah, okay. So what else? That was pretty much it. I think that we've covered a little bit of floating, Flexbox. We covered responsiveness, responsive design, CSS transitions, whatever else. A lot of that stuff, not all of it, we'll be using that knowledge for today's site. But since we've got some new people coming in, I should refer back to this guy. Oops, not this guy. This guy. Make sure that you have harp installed. All you have to do is download and install Node.js, and then go ahead and run npm install-g harp or sudo npm install-g harp if that doesn't work. Either way, if you run this npm install command, if it succeeds, if it's successful, you'll get a lot of warnings. Don't worry about those warnings. But yeah, go ahead and do this. Again, harp will help us to speed up development essentially on our site, because we'll be able to use all of the cool templating and pre-processing stuff that we're used to and run a local server. And just make it seem a little bit more professional. All right. Any questions or thoughts before we transition into the new stuff? All right. I should mention that we don't have too many weeks of class left. We've got these next 2 weeks where we're going to work on this mock-up thing. And then from there, let's see, what did I do previously? Right, well, I had a class on back-end web development, which is really just kind of a whirlwind tour through a few different languages, a few different frameworks written in a few different languages. What I'm going to be doing is giving you all a virtual machine that you can install on your computer, which will allow you to follow along with exactly what I've got on my screen. A virtual machine is really kind of like a full-on operating system installed inside your operating system. That's got like a disk of its own. It's got an operating system. It's whatever. So in other words, you can run Linux inside Windows. You can run Windows inside Mac OS. You can probably not run Mac OS inside anything. But regardless, that's kind of how it all works. You're able to do one inside the other, which means I can actually hand you on a thumb drive or from a download like a fully set up, machine that's got all the back-end stuff that's necessary on it. But I'll also put up full instructions on how to install all that stuff if necessary. Yeah, so that will be what's happening in a few weeks. After that, I will have a class. I think my final class is going to be kind of a silly one. It's going to be on the HTML, sort of an appendix, if you will. Every HTML element on a single page, and I'll explain what every single one does. It's very silly and wholly unnecessary because you're probably not going to use like 75% of those elements that I'm describing to you, but it's a good lesson in how to write, in how to use elements correctly, using them semantically, if you will. So there's that. Okay. Anyway, hopefully you're all installing and you've got harp at this point, because we're going to get started on our new stuff. Thank you. So this is the front-end web development class. My name is Jeffrey. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to be putting together a site from a mock-up. Hopefully we get all the way through. I've sort of thrown a wrench in the mix this time around because we're going to make it not only work from a mockup, but also try to make it responsive. So what I'd like to point you to is the mockup that we're going to work off of. Here's the story. Here's the idea. I want you to click on this guy right here. Mockup and assets can be found here. So I've just pointed you to the answer key. This whole thing is actually the full site, all the code, all the HTML, all the CSS. So if you want to cheat and just take a look at the final result, go ahead and pull down this whole thing and just get it working, and there you are. But this repository also has a number of different files called mockup. So I'd like you to open up mockup.png and take a look at it. So the story is that a designer working for this company, NoiseCo, has handed you, the front-end developer, this image. This is an image, and what it is essentially what they want this website to look like. This image also comes with an annotated version. Essentially, it's the same thing, but with a lot of red text all over it, saying exactly, what the measurements should be, what we should focus on in terms of colors and sizes and distances and all that sort of stuff. In the real world, you probably won't get an annotated mockup. Rather, you will probably get a mockup created in either Photoshop or in Sketch or some other sort, or maybe Adobe XD, some sort of user interface designing tool that is easy to hand off to a developer. And then that developer will open up their version of Photoshop or Sketch or XD and look through it and make all the different sorts of measurements and eye droppings and blending options, looking at so that they need to, and get all the information they need to infer from that. But I don't want you guys to have to purchase Photoshop or Sketch or XD right now. Ideally, your client would do that for you, so you'd be able to go ahead and get all this information for you. So in other words, I've given you all this information. All you have to do is just load up this image and you're good, right? When I say you're going to have to do all this, obviously I'm going to walk everyone through it. Hopefully, as usual, I like to have as much input as possible and ask people questions and get a little call and response going on, but whatever. That's the idea. So without further ado, let's go ahead and create our project folder and start writing out our HTML. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to go ahead and create my new folder. As usual, go ahead and create your folder in your own workspace, your own area, your own code folder. Don't put it in my folder that you download. Please don't create 18 folders called class something. This is just my workflow and my Git repository. Don't do it here. Do it somewhere else. Create your own folder. Anyway, I'd like to go ahead and just start right here. Okay, so assuming that you've installed HARP via your command line, it's now time to navigate into that folder that you've just created for this project. So I can't really give you that much instruction on how to do that. The assumption is you know how to use the cd command to change directories into the proper folder you need to get to. ls lists out stuff, cd changes into the directory you need, series 9, cd class 18, and here we are. So if anyone does need any help CDing into their directory, I can tell you how to do that, but it's pretty straightforward. You start from your home folder, you're able to go into a folder from there. Hopefully you're not creating your folder in your root directory like / or C drive. Yeah, if there's that. If it's on your desktop, then you would cd desktop, and then you'd go from there. So hopefully everyone's got that down. Still seeing some people looking at their screens, so I'm just going to give them a second to navigate to where they need to go. By the way, if you see a really weird name of someone else's computer right next to your thing, my name isn't Kenneth. This is not Kenneth's MacBook Air. It's not even a MacBook Air. What's happening is that NoiseBridge is assigning a different host name to your computer for a really weird reason. Once you disconnect from the NoiseBridge Wi-Fi, then that won't happen to you anymore. That seems to be a misconfiguration on the NoiseBridge side. It's really strange, and freaks people out thinking that they're getting hacked, but they're not. At least I don't think so. So yeah, there's that. Okay, so we're all wherever we need to be in our project folder, and all you got to do is do harp server. Voila, you're now running a server at localhost 9000 that, when opened, is going to give you a 404. Great, because you haven't created an index page that is going to load up what we need to load up. But the idea is that once we do create a file called index.html, this 404 will be replaced with that file. Cool. All right. So next thing, a little thing that I want to talk about, since we are using harp, is this page has a lot of different items on it. It's got home, about, clients, testimonials, contact us. So it's got a nav bar. And so it's a site with multiple pages on it. Even though we're not going to be designing those secondary pages, or sort of developing those secondary pages, we should be developing this such that if you wanted to add those pages, it would be very easy to do. So what I'm getting at is that we should be creating a layout file as well as an individual content file. That is to say, with harp and with most static site generators or other sorts of web frameworks, there's the concept of a layout file that sort of lays out your head and then your main content and your footer, and then there's the individual content, so you don't have to copy and paste the header and footer on every single page you work on. That would be a fool's errand. That would be very silly that if you needed to create a multi-page site and you needed to change the header, you'd have to go into every single page and change that header. That makes no sense. So this is going to use a layout file that we can put our main content into. That said, I forget how to do that in harp, so one second. Documentation, let's see, layout. Let's go ahead and create a layout.ejs file and then an index.ejs file. That's what we want. Yes?
I noticed there's a harp init command.
Yeah, there is a harp init command. That we might want to do that. Let me see here. Create an application. We could do that. We can start the server, or we can do harp init. Let's see, where's the init command? The init command goes ahead and creates an index, 404, main layout, and main.less. Sure, okay, let's do that. Yeah. Okay, so what I'd like to do is if you ever need to quit out of an application that's running in your terminal, like if you don't see your terminal that you can type into, you might be in the middle of a currently running process, just do Control-C to stop the server or stop any application that is taking up your terminal. I'm going to go ahead and do harp init dot. Harp init dot is going to initialize a harp project at the current directory, that means dot. So once we do an ls, now we should see index.jade. Jade, really? Oh, uses Jade. You may also use EJS. Okay. How do we use EJS instead? I don't really know if this has actually done us any help. Yeah, actually do this. RM star, get rid of everything, and then let's just start from scratch. It's easier to just do it that way. Okay. Yes.
I tried to, first we can delay this until after the class. So I tried to do in the sudo command with the and the other two letters install harp.
Yeah.
It looked like it was doing a lot of things. But
Okay.
Harp something and command not found.
Command not found?
Command
Did
not
you
found.
do an npm install -g?
I thought that did.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
What did it say? Let me check the thing. Do you have your scroll back here? So let's see. Okay, so
But then
where did you install it? Let's scroll up, please. Okay, keep going up.
see if it's
Oh, well, I don't really know what to tell you.
try again sometime.
Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I don't need to read that.
Very well.
Okay, so npm install. Did you run that? Npm
Yes,
install.
That's how I ran it.
Wait, you ran both of those lines?
No, I ran sudo this.
Okay. Have you tried sudo harp instead of just harp?
And it said the command on that.
I'm not sure what to tell you. Sorry. Must be configured differently. Okay. Yeah, okay, so right now your folder should be empty. If you'd like, you can open up this folder in a text editor of your choice. So I'm going to go ahead, I ran the subl dot command, which is going to open up my class folder in Sublime Text, because you don't need to use the terminal to write all our code. That would be terrible. Okay, just go ahead and in your text editor, open the folder that you just did there. All right? Okay, so next up, let's create a new document, and it's trying to save it inside Mac HD. Don't do that. Let's open it up. Let's save it inside our class folder or our project folder as index.ejs. EJS stands for Embedded JS. Essentially, it's an HTML page with special delimiters that allow you to write JavaScript inside it for the sole purpose of generating more HTML. All that HTML is going to go, all that JavaScript is going to go away once it reaches the browser. This is for templating purposes only, for pre-processing templating purposes only. So yeah, don't think that this is a JavaScript file, because it's not. Also, it actually did get a little hot with all the windows closed. Do you think that you could like? What?
It's good.
I don't know. I'm a little warm. Sorry, I'm kind of like sweating a little bit. If you could open like maybe one of them. I'm sorry. It's like not. Sorry. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay, so yeah. Next up, we also want to create our layout folder, our layout file. So this is going to be called _layout.ejs. Why underscore? Because underscore is going to tell our server, harp, that we actually don't want this file to be accessible on its own. If we give it an underscore, harp is going to make it so it only gets included into other files, but not accessible on in its own right. So that's what that underscore means. Okay, so we've done that. We can go ahead and start writing out our layout, because our layout is going to be pretty much everything except for all the content inside here. So from the top here, we've got what looks like a header. We've got our nav bar, and then we've got, I would say that this section here and this section here are going to be the content that is only available on the main page. This footer is also going to be on every page. So the stuff that's really going to go in our main content file, our index.ejs file, is going to be this and that. Who's made that decision? How do we decide upon that? I made that executive decision. I mean, like, you know, you have to sort of decide this stuff yourself, right? What goes on every page, what goes on every individual page. Anyway, let's start writing inside our layout.ejs the usual stuff. That. If you're using Sublime Text, type HTML tab, and it'll write all this out for you. Next up, title is noiseco. Now, when we create a page, we want to write all of the HTML first. We're going to worry about the CSS secondarily, because the most important part of a document is the content, is the structure. It's the HTML. The CSS, all the presentational stuff, comes after. So let's worry about that second. All right. So this looks to me like it's a header element. How do I know that? Well, it's a header, right? And HTML has a header element, so let's do that. Header. Inside our header, it looks like we've got a heading, noiseco. This is heading 1. That is to say, it's the most important heading in this area on this page, or in this page, that is. Also, underneath that, we have a little login area. Why don't I go ahead and align these things to the left and the right so we don't have to keep switching back and forth. 1 second. All right, that's better. Okay, so we've got this little login area. Welcome, Jeffrey. My account. Log out. So I'm going to say that this is a list of 3 things. It's the first item, quote unquote, not so much an item, but it's just a little greeting. It says, welcome, Jeffrey. So UL, inside here, welcome, Jeffrey. Next item is going to be a link. And next item is also going to be a link. Oops. I use hash to denote a link that currently doesn't go anywhere. This is kind of what people do when they're putting together a page. Hash is just going to not do anything. Or actually, it's going to scroll you up to the top of the page when you click it. But it's better than just, well, you have to define an href to make it clickable. So there you are. OK, so there's our header. Next up, let's work on our nav. This is our nav. Our nav has an unordered list inside it as well, with 5 items. Each one has a link inside it. Actually, yeah. All right, good. So you want to go ahead and copy and paste this link, this list item 5 times. Home, about, clients, testimonials, and contact us. And this first one can link to /, which is the root directory. You know. Okay, so here's what we got so far. We've got our header with our h1. We got our UL, which is our little login area. Welcome, my account, log out. Next, inside our nav, we have another UL, which has a bunch of LIs inside it. Home, about, clients, testimonials, contact us. I'd like you to challenge yourself to not ask me to keep scrolling up and down so you can catch up. Rather, I've given you a guide with which to work. Go ahead and just take a look at what's on the left here and finish out whatever is currently not being displayed on the right there. Got it? Cool. Little exercise in critical thinking. Okay. Everyone seems like they're all caught up. Great. So let's move on. Everything underneath here is our main content area. And our main content area can be denoted using a main element if necessary. I'm not actually sure if it's necessary though, so actually I take it back. Let's not use that. We don't need to. Main is a good element that you can use that sits beneath the main header of your page and the main between, that is, the main header of your page and the main footer of your page. You should only use it once per document. But in this case, I like to try to use as few elements as possible. I don't just try to like drawing boxes on the page when it's not necessary. So I'm just going to not use that because I'm probably not going to apply any styling that requires anything to be encompassed inside an additional main element. It doesn't really do any good necessarily. So can we start making these 2 sections right here? Well, I would not do that right here. I wouldn't do that inside our layout. Because remember, our layout is meant to be used on every page of our site. And our layout encompasses our header and our nav and our little footer area. But everything inside there is not going to go inside here because we don't want it to show up on every single page. So instead, I'm going to put a little bit of embedded JavaScript. It looks like this. If you're familiar with embedded Ruby, ERB, it looks identical to this. Essentially what we're doing here is we're using these special EJS delimiters. This is the only part of this file that's going to use some sort of special magic that's only available inside EJS. And it's the yield command. This yield command is essentially going to print out the contents of whatever document we're currently on. It's going to essentially surround the contents of that document with what goes after it and what goes before it. So this is kind of like a little secret sauce that links up our layout.ejs and index.ejs, which we have yet to write. Okay, so we're skipping past our heroes section here and our details section here. That's what we're going to call those, and going all the way down to our footer. so footer. Our footer also has a noise code. I'm going to give it an H2 because it's not as important as the H1 heading in the header. And it also has a nav. It's the exact same nav, so I don't need you to write the entire thing out again. All you really have to do is just copy the existing nav up here. See all this stuff? Copy this whole nav and just throw it into the footer. All I did was just copy and paste the nav from above this yield section and put it right inside here. In fact, it's actually indented 1 too far. Yeah?
Yeah, sorry for me just said this. Would you ever yield more than once in the layout?
You wouldn't yield the same thing more than once in a layout, but there is the ability to define more than one content area. At least in ERB there is, where you can say like content for this is this, content for that is that. So you'd have your main yield statement, which yields out like the main layout, but you could also say like for this page, not only do I want to render this stuff in the main content, but I also want to yield special stuff in the header or special stuff in the head, like special meta tags or a title. Exactly. It's a great idea. Here you could say like yield title, and if you had some sort of content for a title or something like that. But that might not be necessarily what you'd use yield for. Maybe instead you can print out some other variable which is set in some other way. Harp has documentation on how to set variables per page if you need them. But that is a very good example of how to do that. Yeah, that's another thing you'd use EJS or some other sort of templating language for. When we talk in 2 weeks about backend web development, I'm going to talk about PHP, which I'll say now that you probably shouldn't use, but it's worth talking about because PHP is essentially EJS or ERB, but using its own language. So by teaching you these really simple things, you start to kind of understand what PHP is and why people use it and how it got popular. Cool. So there we go. Footer, H2, noise code, nav, and then finally, after the nav, we have a small element. Why small? Is it because it's smaller than things? No. We never use elements, we never use certain elements in HTML to make things look bigger or smaller or bolder or more italic or underlined or whatever else. We don't do that in HTML. CSS is the language that we use to style certain things a different way. We use small here because according to the spec, you use small for legal print, for fine print, for copyright notices, for stuff like that. So it's a very strange case and it's a very strange name, but it's essentially repurposing an element that once in the dark ages of HTML was used to make text small before they realized that that was a very bad idea. So now small does still make things small just for kind of backwards compatibility reasons, but it's meant to be used for copyright notices. Very strange backstory with small. Anyway, that's what that does there. Okay. Oh yeah, one more thing. I did this ampersand copy semicolon thing. This is what's known as an HTML entity. The most popular one being NBSP, non-breaking space. You can use that to write out a whole bunch of characters, mostly ASCII characters that have special codes associated with them that allow you to print things out without actually trying to find those characters yourself. If you do have access to a character map, which by the way, if you're using macOS, you do really easily, you get out of the edit, emoji, and symbols, and now all of a sudden you have access to all these different symbols. And we can go to, I don't know, punctuation. Now I guess copyright is not a punctuation thing. Technical symbols? I don't know. It's somewhere in there. You can probably search copyright. There we go. And then go ahead and just put in the copyright sign. But if you want to do that, actually, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Something that's missing from our head is a special meta tag that allows us to use Unicode without any problems. The way that browsers work is, especially for backwards compatibility reasons, the default encoding is not always Unicode. So not to get into character encoding or anything too deep, but Unicode, as you probably know, is essentially a set of characters encompassing pretty much every character known to man that's not yet going through review. It also includes all emojis. So, emojis are essentially Unicode characters. That's it. But in order to use emoji without any problems in a browser, you need to set a special meta tag up here. It says meta char set equals UTF-8. That will let you use Unicode, right? Any language that you can possibly dream of using just regular HTML. So now that we've written this, yeah.
One character as opposed to going to be 2 characters, as in 16 bits.
Sure. Yeah. Well, this is UTF-8. Yeah. So like it doesn't include UTF-16 or UTF-32. It just works. I think it's just a different. That's the encoding that people use. So we can now replace this copy easily with a copyright symbol if you feel like it. If you can find out where to find it. Technical symbol. No, I'm sorry. Copyright. Is it this one or is it this one? Oh gosh, I don't know. They're both copyright signed. Oh gosh. Well, I'm just going to use the second one because it seems like it's, gosh, I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, hopefully that works. Okay. So I think at this point we can go ahead and load up our server, our page from our server, and see what it looks like. Only it's not running, so it needs to be running first. If you go back to your terminal, make sure that you're running the harp server command, that you see this message that your server is listening at port 9000. Go ahead and go to port 9000. Cool. So there we go. That did not work. I used the wrong copyright symbol. It's a box. Let me fix that. If it doesn't work a second time, I'm just going to go back to that HTML entity and copy thing. Copyright. I don't know why there are 2 copyright symbols. Stupid. Still didn't work. Did I do something wrong with the... I did this correctly, right? Yeah, I totally did. I don't know why it's not working. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to go back and use the ampersand copy thing and not worry about it. Ah, there we go. There's our copyright symbol. Okay, not sure what happened there. Anyway, here's our page. As usual, not very nice looking, but utilitarian nevertheless. Now we can go ahead and write our main copy. So what's funny is that our EJS file is blank. So Harp just knew automatically to use our layout.ejs file just based on what we named it and decorate this blank file with the header and the footer, everything on top and below the yield. So what we're going to write here is what goes inside that yield area. See, there we go. Hello world. That goes in between our header and our footer. Let's start doing it. Inside our index, we've got 2 main sections on the page. This nice kind of cloudy sky building thing, and then we've got this beige area. They're both section tags, so we're going to create 2 sections. Section number 1 has a heading inside it that says, achieve synergy with Vern source. Okay. Going back to the repo for a second, I think that there might be, yes, there is. There's a copy.txt file. If you don't want to type down exactly all of the copy for the entire site, which I certainly don't, there's copy. So you can go ahead, go back to jeffreyw/noiseco, go to the copy.txt thing, and just copy and paste these lines. Makes it a lot easier than having to retype it all out, because this is not a typing class. Go ask Mavis Beacon. All right. But I do have to have both the copy and the mockup open, so let's go back to our mockup here. Okay. underneath our heading, we've got href, whatever, sign up now. By the way, I thought I'd mention, in case anyone's curious as to why I'm reusing an H1, remember that I've got a single H1 in my layout, right, up here? So why do I also use an H1 inside here? Is it because it's really big text? No, never. You never use a heading just because you got big text on the page. You use a heading because it's a heading. You know, it's an actual, like, you know, title for something. And I'm going to say that this is sort of the title of this hero section. Why is it an H1 instead of an H2 when it's less important than the actual title of the page? Well, that's a sort of a weird semantic quirk about HTML. There are certain things in HTML called sectioning elements. One of them is the section tag. Another is the aside. There's the article, the nav. I think that might be it. The header and the footer are not sectioning elements. But those few tags, if you use headings inside them, the headings are not as important as what goes outside of them. So you can essentially reset your numbering. You can say H1 inside the section rather than just H1. Instead of having to keep track, H1, H2, H3, H4. It makes your page a lot more modular. It makes it so you don't really have to worry about what's outside of it. So, you know, that's kind of helpful. So in this case, this is the H1 of the section rather than the H1 of the page. Yeah?
Maybe this isn't easy to answer, but why did you choose to make the button a element instead of a button?
It's a good question. Although it looks like a button and acts like and maybe acts like a button, the reason that I use an A in this case is because I expect that this page that this will eventually bring me to a new page where I can sign up. I use a hyperlink whenever it's going to change the URL that it takes me to. I use a button whenever it's not. That is to say, I use a button whenever JavaScript is going to be used. Now, I will say that there might be a case in which you want it to do both. Let's say, for example, that you want this A to cause some JavaScript to happen, but if it doesn't, if JavaScript is disabled or something, you still might want an href to take you to the page where you can actually get that action done. So my rule is that use A when you want to take someone, or you have some sort of resource that the action corresponds to, some sort of URL that it corresponds to, and use a button when you don't. You can style them to look exactly the same way. I wouldn't worry about what one thing renders like or not, because that's CSS's job to take care of. So yeah, good question. That's why I use an A instead of a button in this case. Okay, section number 2 is essentially an unordered list of 3 things. Detail number 1, detail number 2, detail number 3. So to make it easier, you can go ahead and just copy these guys. Copy lines 12 through 17 and just paste them inside a section here. And go ahead and create an unordered list. Go ahead and surround lines 1 and 2 inside a list item. Lines 3 and 4 inside another list item. And lines 5 and 6 inside another list item. Next up, go ahead and surround each first line of every list item inside an H2. Although this is inside a section, I'm giving each one of these an H2 because none of them is the main heading of the section. This section doesn't have a main heading, so I'm using H2 instead. And then finally, these things are paragraphs, so you use the P element.
What's your opinion on self-closing tags?
My opinion on self-closing tags is that li is not a self-closing tag. Huh?
It's not.
It's not.
No.
Nope. P, Li, nope, none of those are self-closing tags. No, they're not void elements. They require to be open and closed. The only ones that we're using on this page that are self-closing, the only one actually right now is this meta tag. Every other one needs to be open and closed.
Perhaps you just said auto closing.
Auto closing.
Right.
There's no such thing in HTML5. Yeah, there are like, there's this, there's the meta tag, there's the link tag, there's the image tag, there's the break tag, the HR tag, the horizontal rule tag that is. There is, what else is there? There's the base tag, one or two others, and those are all self-closing, but it's a definition of the language itself that specifies which actual elements are self-closing and which ones aren't. You might see sometimes something like, if it's a completely empty tag like P, MP, you might see people try to do this. That is something you cannot do in HTML5. It's not possible. It was possible using XHTML, but we don't use XHTML anymore, so there is no such thing as self-closing tags with a little slash at the end of HTML5 anymore. So yeah, LI, P, whatever else, you need to have an opening and closing tag. And for good measure too, I mean, you really want to know what's inside the box. And I would recommend that if you're not doing it, that you use the indentation that I'm doing. It'll really, really help you out in case you forget to close a certain element or not. So, you know, LI, you know, H2, whatever else, make sure that the opening and closing elements are on the same column in your text editor, because you'll know if you missed anything. Okay, so let's go back over here, reload the page, see what we got. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. What just happened? Let me check something really quick. Uh-oh. What did I do wrong? Should this be like an HTML instead of an EJS? Let me see something here. Oh, okay. Nope, nope. That's not good either. Oof. What's going on here? Wow. We need to tell Harp that this is an HTML page being rendered inside here. You'd think that would be the default behavior, but it's not. What am I doing wrong? Let me do something weird. Index.html.ejs. Let's see if that works. Nope. Oh, goodness. Great. I love bug fixing in the middle of a class. What's going on? EJS documentation, J templating, markdown. What's the bug? Am I doing something wrong? Do I need to have some sort of like enclosing thing here? I really shouldn't have to. Should I be using something other than yield? Is that the problem? Let's see. Yield. 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 Using EJS. Yield. Ah. That's it. Okay. I did something wrong. Index.ejs is fine. Leave it like that. The problem was how I'm yielding. It turns out that EJS has a little kind of protection going on, that you need to be clear about whether you want your file that you're including to be sort of escaped or not, treated like HTML or treated like regular text. So by using this little equal sign here inside yield, I was essentially escaping all of the brackets into, check this out. This is actually what the code looks like. Scrolling down, look at all that. Ampersand LT, ampersand GT. If you've ever seen this before, LT stands for less than. GT stands for greater than. It's hot inside here again. I'm sorry. Like everything is being escaped so as to not be. I'm really sorry. You can move up front. It's a little. It's not as. If you want to move up front, it's not as like cold up here than it is back there. But yeah, I like airflow. It keeps it from being a smelly, really hot place. I'm sorry. There's less airflow up front. If you'd like to move up front, I'm sorry. Yeah, LT, GT, etc. What's happening here is that the layout is being escaped when it really doesn't need to be. So to undo that, we just set the equal sign to a dash instead of that, and then it works the way you expect it to. Okay. All right, so there we are. Chief synergy, blah, blah, blah. Now it works the way you expect it to. What I did was I changed that equal sign inside yield to a dash. This, of course, is outside of the realm of, like, you know, regular front-end stuff, so sorry I had to spend a few minutes worrying about that. Okay, so we are done writing our HTML. If we wanted to put this page out there and put it on the internet for everyone to see, they'd certainly be able to use it. Not enjoy it, but screen readers would be able to read it. Web crawlers would be able to index it. You would have a perfectly readable page. Great. Let's move on to making it look like a modern website and not something from 1991. Okay. So back to our design. First thing we do to start designing is link up a link tag to our layout. Why do our layout? Because we'd expect that we want this style.css, which we have yet to create, to work on every page on our site. Not just index.ejs. Okay, next up, let's create it. Now, I'm not going to create style.css. I'm going to create style.scss and save it inside this folder. SCSS literally stands for Sassy CSS, which stands for Sassy Cascading Style Sheets. Sass is a preprocessor language that allows you to use some features of CSS that are not available in just regular CSS, at least not right now. They will be shortly in the future, but in the meantime, things like variables and mixins and nesting, you'll see how it starts to become pretty cool. We'll start to see how it makes a much more efficient, compact, good-looking CSS file by writing it in this special language that does a little bit more for us. Okay, so let's start with the basics. First thing is that there seems to be this nice kind of padding in each one of these sections here. Right here it says 12 pixels left-right body padding. So you see how there's this kind of like light area on the left and the right? That's not a mistake on my part. This is actually me showing that all text, all content should kind of not be sitting at the very, very edge of the screen. There should be a little bit of padding on the left and the right. So that should be a 12 pixel left-right padding. So we could apply that to the body. Let's see what happens when we apply that to the body. Let's say body padding is 0 on the top, 12 pixels on the right, left and right. So immediately it pushes things a little bit inward. If we were to make this page a little smaller, oops, I'm sorry. Oh, really quick. Yes, there will be lab this Thursday. There probably will not be class next week because it's Memorial Day. So no, there will not be class. So unfortunately, even though this is a two-part thing, there will be a week of no class in between it. So I am continuing it 2 weeks from now, not one. Sorry about that. And to answer your question, You can use a slash in your BR, but it's not quote unquote valid HTML5. If you want to use the BR tag, which you usually shouldn't because there are better ways of spacing out text between each other, you should use BR, but just don't put a slash in it. It is a void element, meaning that there is no such thing as a closing BR tag.
Is that a change from what it used to be?
Yes, it's a change from HTML5. I'm sorry, from XHTML, and I think it's a change from HTML4 as well. Yeah. All right, so a little hard to tell, but at least on the right here, there's a little bit of a buffer. It's actually a 20-pixel buffer because there's this automatic 8-pixel margin that that every page has. See how this body has both red, orange, and green? That orange is the margin that comes with our user agent style sheet, and the padding, the green is the padding that we added on. We don't want margin, so let's get rid of that margin. As you can see, there's no margin stopping stuff from the very top of the page or the left of the page. It's just that padding. So let's get rid of the margin. Doing that, now the page now it looks a little better. There's still this spacing at the top. Does anyone remember what this spacing comes from? The little bit of white area between the top of the blue body and the actual very top of the page. It's very strange where it comes from. It is from the H1. If we go inside the header and the H1, we see that the header has margin that extends to the very top of the page. This is what happens with margin overflow. Vertical margins can overflow their containers as long as nothing above them has their own padding or border. It's really strange, but that's what's pushing the entire body down. We don't have to worry about that in a second because we're going to change how that all renders. Really quick question in the meantime. Does anybody have a power supply that I might be able to plug into? I'm at about 33%. I think this class is going to go for a lot longer. So yeah. Oh, no. People here. That would be great. I can just borrow that. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's, yep. Oh, no, it will not be. Sorry, it's an old MagSafe. Apologies. Thank you so much. All right. Yes, this will work. Thanks a lot. In my approach to be super minimalist and efficient, I don't bring my own chargers, and then I run into this problem sometimes. Oh well. Okay. Great, thanks. So, right, where are we at? We have this padding on the page now. Without further ado, let's do something really straightforward, which is color each section differently so we can actually see some differences between them all. So we start out at the top. We're going to make our header this nice teal color, and according to our annotations, that color is 005275. So our header is going to be background of 005275. Next up, our nav is going to have a background of 002344, according to this red text right here. Let's skip this hero for now. It's got a background image, and we'll get to that in a second. Yeah. Next up, we've got our this section here. So we've just run into a problem because we want to style this section differently than that section, right? And it turns out we have two sections here. So how do we differentiate between these two guys? Add a class, certainly. Let's name each one of these sections with a class so we can style them differently. This section I'm going to call hero. That's just a term for kind of a big eye-catching portion of the page, hero. Some people also call it the Jumbotron. That's what Bootstrap calls it. This one's going to be called the details section because it's got some details in it. So now we can use section class details. All right, so details. Remember, we're using this dot here because dot denotes class rather than element name. Background of EC E2, oh, wrong button, to ECE2 C6. Great. And then finally, our footer has a background of 002344. So we can just say nav footer. I just turned this into 2 selectors instead of 1 for this rule. Okay, so let's see how this works, how this looks. Okay, that's a start. Right, okay. Where are we at? Right, so we've colored our stuff in. Now, there's a little bit of a problem. There's spacing both around and in between each section. Spacing on the top, spacing in between, spacing on the left and the right. Now, I'll just give you a little spoiler and say the spacing in between comes from all the headings we're using, or other elements. In this case, this nav has a UL inside it. Unordered lists automatically have 1M, 1 line height of margin before and after them, which, again, using container overflow, spaces out the actual containers from one another rather than the actual UL from its encompassing nav. So that's why there's space between the nav and the header and the nav and the section class hero, because the UL itself is pushing its parent nav away from its siblings, which is kind of strange. Same thing with this heading here. It has some space. This heading here also has space. So that's that weird container overflow happening. That's not really going to be a problem after a while because we'll either get rid of that margin or we'll get rid of, or we'll add some padding to containers, and margin cannot overlap padding. So that's going to sort of fix it for us. But that's not going to fix what's going on the left here, left and right, each one of these guys. There's padding on the left and the right. Why is that? Because we added padding to the body. We added padding to the body, and that's a problem because we want these colors to stretch all the way across the screen. So, sorry, I'm just overhearing this. Sorry. Yeah. So there's a problem. There's a problem here, which is that we want each one of these colors to stretch to the left and the right, but we also want to be able to add this padding to push the content in so it doesn't go all the way to the end of the page. This is going to require a little bit of surgery, a little bit of sadness surgery. The problem is that we really can't pad from the outside and also have colors stretch beyond that unless we do something really strange, which I like using negative margin, which I'm not going to talk about. So what we actually have to do instead is apply this padding inside each portion of our page rather than applying it to the body. That is the first point at which we're going to have to start adding additional DOM elements to our page, which are only there for presentational purposes. So that's where we start to use the div element. Again, div is essentially what we use when we have no other use for the element other than just presentational reasons. Something that has 0 semantic value whatsoever and is only there for styling, we use divs. So follow along with me. I'm going to go ahead and create a new div with a class of container and put it as the main child of every header, nav, section, footer element. It's going to look like this. Div class container. Now you might ask, hey, wait, why don't we just add padding to the header instead? Why don't we all add padding to the header, the nav, this and that, whatever else? The reasons will become clear when we start making this a wider screen page. There's going to be a part at which we want to use this container for more than just padding, but also restricting the width of the entire document. So this is what we want to do for now. It might not be apparent at the moment, but you'll see specifically why we're using a separate element rather than simply adding the padding that we want to the header etc. So div class container now encompasses everything inside the header. Div class container now encompasses everything inside this UL. Sorry, inside this nav. Div class container encompasses everything inside the footer. And back to our index, div class container is going to encompass everything inside our section class hero. And finally, div class container encompasses the list inside the details. No questions so far. Great. Okay. So I'll let you all do that for a little while. I already did all my indentation to be nice and pretty, but make sure that the one and only single child inside the header, the nav, the footer, and then the two sections is this div class container. All right, how we doing? Everyone got your containers in? Alrighty, I'm gonna keep going on just a little bit. All right, so we're missing something, which is that we created this div class container everywhere, but we didn't actually apply any styling to it. So what I'm going to do is take this padding here and move it from the body to our new container rule. It works like that. So dot container. You'll notice that obviously in the cases where I'm selecting things by class, I'm not qualifying the element. Like for example, I could do div dot container, which means select the element div that has a class of container. But that's almost always unnecessary. When you start writing very complicated CSS, you're going to find that you're going to use class rules almost entirely and not worry about elements, because there will be so many elements on the page that you can't differentiate between them by specifying what element names they are. So it's better when you can avoid it and you have a class on the element to select it by its class name rather than what element it is. I'm still using header and nav and footer and body because there are only one of those elements on this page. But if this were a much more complicated page, I would start to differentiate them in different ways. Okay, so let's go back here. Now, as you can see, these guys stretch all the way across the page. But because there's this container in each one of them, we see that they're nice and not sitting all the way to the very edge of the content. So colors stretch all the way across, content does not, because it's padded inward by just a little bit. All righty. Okay, let's continue on. Let's do some basic changes here, such as the font. The font for the entire page is going to be sans serif. Sans serif meaning not times, more like Helvetica. What else? I don't know. What else goes for the entire page? Not much, really. Yeah, okay, so we're good so far. Okay, let's start to style the header in a little bit more depth. Let's worry about this guy, noiseco up here. So noiseco, this heading up here at the top is kind of interesting. It is very stylish. In fact, so stylish to the point where it's actually more of an image than it is a heading with the word noiseco inside it. In fact, what I'd like you to do for the next part is go back to your noiseco repository and go to this assets directory and go ahead and download the assets directory. I'm sorry, not the assets directory, but the assets images directory. In fact, this is really hard to do from within GitHub, harder than it really should be. So you might consider just downloading the entire repository, going to NoiseCo and just downloading the zip, or just going to each one of these individual files in the images folder and downloading them. The way you download individual files in GitHub is by first clicking on the name, and then going ahead and clicking on raw, and then going ahead and saving it. It's very backwards. So what I'd probably recommend instead is just going to this repository, downloading the zip, and then just looking for the images folder. So I've just downloaded noisecode master.zip. I'm going to go ahead and open that up, go into assets, images. Let's go ahead and take all these guys. Actually, let's just take this whole images folder and copy and paste it into our class 18 guy here. So this is what it should look like at the end. Your folder should contain layout.js, index.js, style.css, and that images folder copied from the repository that you downloaded. It would either be the responsibility of you, the developer, going into the Photoshop or Sketch or XD file and exporting all those assets, or the responsibility of your designer to deliver those assets to you in a nice web-friendly form. What I'm kind of glossing over right now is that a lot of these images are already optimized perfectly for the web. They're already semi-transparent. They've been reduced down to a proper file size by optimization of whatever sort. They're the correct file type. For example, some of these are PNG files, and this one is a JPEG file. This one's a JPEG file because it's a really big picture of clouds and buildings. JPEGs are often used for photos, whereas PNGs are often used for icons or other things that have sometimes a limited color palette or are meant to have exact pixel perfect display and no lossiness. So it's kind of like the difference between a FLAC file and an MP3 file. A FLAC is lossless, whereas an MP3 is lossy. But a FLAC, despite its perfection, is a bigger file size, and an MP3 has a different bit rate, meaning a certain amount of lossy compression.
Unless you compress just a square wave with FLAC, then you got a really small.
Yes, right. So there's that. No, I mean the same thing goes for PNG. You can save like a 1-bit, PNG portable network graphic, which will be really, really super small because you're only containing as much color information as you need, which is almost nothing. So yeah, I mean it works in a similar way. There's also scalable vector graphics, which are not raster images. Like these things are made out of pixels, whereas SVGs are made out of a whole bunch of different, polygons and points and vectors and what have you. If I were to redo this site for today, especially in an era where things are less skeuomorphic, you don't see shadows and shading and gradients and stuff anymore. You usually see nice flat colors. That's very good because people like to use vector graphics, which lend themselves a lot better to nice flat, colors and shapes and whatever. We're not doing that in this class, but they're called SVGs, scalable vector graphics. I think that you have the question backwards. What does semi-transparent do for images that are web ready? It's more how do you make semi-transparent images web ready, which is save them as 24-bit transparent PNGs using Photoshop or whatever tool you use to generate images, GIMP or what have you. Web ready, I don't know. I mean, you just have to make sure that you're not saving an extremely large file that is scaled much larger than it needs to be or is just much more detailed than it needs to be. Consider that if you have a very, very large image, that one, it needs to be semi-transparent, and if it doesn't, then possibly save it as a JPEG, which will incur some lossiness, but at least it won't take like a whole long amount of time to download. So it's a little bit out of the scope of this thing. I've already provided these assets for you, but this is all stuff to sort of take into consideration when you're dealing with image assets. Okay, so we got our images inside our images folder, and now our SCSS file can start to refer to them. What I want to do here is that this heading here, NoiseCo, I want it to remain as a heading. I want it to be an H1. And not only do I want it to be an H1, but I want it to have the words NoiseCo inside it. So how can I keep the HTML looking as it does, while in my mockup it ends up looking like this, with the actual logo.png sort of in place of where the text is? Well, you have a few choices. One choice is that you can simply put an image tag inside the H1 tag. An image tag can be used to display an image to people, to say like, hey guys, here's a picture of my site's logo. But I would argue that in this case, it's not especially relevant that you're displaying an image to anybody for this page. It's not really necessarily important that the header of your page contains the logo. It's just more important that your heading contains the name of your company. So I would argue in this case, this is really getting into strange semantics of HTML, that this is a case in which you don't really need to put an image tag in your HTML. Rather, you can use some special CSS tricks to sort of move the text off the page and replace it with an image. And I think we've talked about this once before in this class. It's the technique of image replacement, where like I said, text is simply moved off the side of the page and replaced with something else. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and select the H1 inside the header. And this H1 is going to have a background of URL images/logo.png. Oops. Yeah. So let's start with that and see what happens. It's going to look a little silly to start out. You're going to say, oh no, I did something wrong. Here's what it looks like. It's repeating itself, right? That's what background images do by default. They simply tile, given as much space as is in the container. Okay. Next thing that we want to do is we want to make this H1 the exact width and height of this image. Now, that's not really possible to do in CSS by saying, oh, whatever the size of the image is. You can't do that. You actually need to specify the font, the height and the width explicitly inside our CSS file. There are some special plugins and post CSS processors that you can do to get this information from a file and like sort of receive the image attributes and insert them into the thing programmatically. That's a little bit too high level, and it's something that HARP and SAS don't have built in, so we're not going to do that. But there is a way where you don't have to hard code the height and the width into this heading to get it to be the exact right size. Because it's not like, let's say, for example, the logo changes. You have to go back to your CSS and change those dimensions again. You probably want to avoid that. In this case, we're not going to avoid it because it's too complicated. So I'm just going to go ahead and line chatter covered the answer for a lab this coming Thursday, please. No class next week was audible. Audible? Oh, that's meaning he heard. Okay. 171 by 50. That is the dimensions of this noise code thing. If you want to get that same information in macOS, you just do a Command I. But it's 171 by 50. So those are the dimensions we're going to put inside our CSS for our heading. So adding 50 for the height, 171 for the width. You go back over here, and great, it doesn't repeat anymore. It doesn't repeat anymore. Oh, even when we zoom in, it doesn't repeat anymore. That's cool. There used to be a bug where zooming into something actually did cause it to tile a little bit on the left and the right because of fractional widths and heights and everything. Anyway. Could you please re-ask this question? I don't understand. Okay. Yeah, so that's good. Next thing we can do is we can center align it. That's quite easy. The idea is this: margin 0 auto. 0 margin on the top and the bottom, automatic margin on the left and the right, which pushes it to the center, given that it's a block element with the width. There we go. Now it's in the center. That had the added effect of getting rid of the top margin on our page because we got rid of that margin on the H1. So now it's at the very top, which we might or might not want. So it's pretty much done except for the fact that that text is still there. We've still got the text noise co sitting on top of the background image. How do we get rid of it? It's a combination of these three rules, which are very kind of strange and hacky if you think about it. Text, indent, 100%. Overflow, hidden. White space, no wrap. This is what's known as the image replacement hack, where you are essentially indenting text so far out of the container and then hiding it so you just don't see it. Overflow hidden means that anything that's rendered outside of the box does not get shown. We talked about this last week. In fact, text indent 100% means it's indented 100% out of the width of the actual box. White space no wrap means it doesn't wrap onto the next line, which would happen if you indented something too far, right? So those three things means the text is gone, bye-bye. Now, couldn't we just remove the word noise code from the HTML? Yes, we could, but that would be very terrible for screen readers or web crawlers. They would read that H1 and they would speak out nothing. And you don't want that. You do want a title, a main heading of your page. Yes, there is a lab this Thursday. Okay, so here we go. That's the reason why we go through all that weird song and dance to get a background image where possibly an image tag would have sufficed if you didn't care as much about semantics as I did. Okay, so next up. By the way, if you did want to use an image here, you want to make sure to add the alt attribute of noise co, which means that if it doesn't load or if it can't be viewed, you see or hear the words noise co instead. Cool. All right, next up, we got our little UL here, our UL inside our header. So yeah, let's say header UL. Oops. Header UL. It's got 3 guys, and each one of these list items seems to sit side by side. So how do we get things to sit side by side rather than stacking on top of each other? We have 2 choices. We can float them, or we can use Flexbox. We're developing for the modern world. This site is going to be mostly used by people on their phones and then possibly used by people on their desktop computers who hopefully are in a permissive environment where they can upgrade to the latest browser. I'm going to assume, given that this site is meant for business-minded American professionals, that they are likely using a browser newer than Internet Explorer 10. So maybe a small minority might not, but they're probably used to a broken web experience by now. So we don't have to save the day and necessarily string them along because we're not Google or Facebook or Twitter or some sort of service that needs to cater to millions or billions of people. So yeah, in this case, we're just going to go ahead and use Flexbox since it's a lot easier. So Flexbox, display flex. This is going to align the list items inside the UL from left to right rather than top to bottom. All right, 1, 2, 3. Now it looks pretty ugly because these bulleted lists are still here. Bullet, bullet, bullet. In fact, there are bullets throughout the entire page. Bullets here, bullets there, bullets everywhere. I'm going to go ahead and make a general rule for this entire page that every list on this page will have no bullets. Not only that, but it won't have the built-in padding that every list has. As you can see, there's margin on the top and the bottom. More importantly, there's padding on the left. That green area is 40 pixels of padding which is added on to every unordered list simply to accommodate the bullets. But since we're getting rid of bullets, we don't need that spacing. So we're just going to go ahead and get rid of it entirely. So every UL on the page up here is going to have a list style of none, which gets rid of the bullets, and a padding of 0, which gets rid of the left padding of 40.
Can you create an animation to make the list style to be between there and then there?
No. Yeah, given that list style it has a series of different like non-numeric values, you can't transition between them. Same way you can't transition between display none and display block. There's no that's not opacity. It's just whether it renders on the page or doesn't. So it's a really kind of a toggle rather than a transition. Good question though. Okay, so list style is gone. You could transition between obviously getting rid of the padding or not. You could do that.
I was kind of going for a blink because the bullet being there reminds me of the blink tag.
Ah, yes. Right. Yeah. Actually, you can use blink now if you use the keyframes animation so and so. There is like, CSS3 blink. Imitating a blink tag with CSS3 animations. W3 schools, animation, blinking cursor, blinking overlay box. That doesn't work. I don't like Stack Overflow. Is there a demo? There we go. Run code snippet. There we go. Blinking. Hooray. Someone created a keyframe. Two hidden, two hidden. Oh, interesting. Wow. Huh. Two hidden. So animate from not hidden to hidden. So I guess you can animate certain values that are not, well, visibility hidden is actually sort of a shortcut for opacity, so I guess that's the reason that you can animate from yes to no. It simply toggles from on and off. Whatever. Anyway, okay. So here we go. We're looking better. The only problem is now that welcome Jeffrey, my account, log out. They're sitting right next to each other, and they're also aligned to the left. How do you align flex items to the center within their own container? I forget. Literally, I do. I think it's something like, oh yeah, justify content center. That's easy enough. Justify content center is going to get every item and smush them into the center of the main axis as close to the center as possible. So it looks like this. Header UL display flex, justify content center. Now they're in the center. My syntax highlighting needs updating because it doesn't think that flex is a valid value, nor does it think that justify content is valid because it gives this thing a black dash. So my editor is out of date. Okay, next up, we need to put a little bit of spacing between them. According to this thing, there is 0.35 ems of spacing in between each one of these guys. That's very precise. The reason I did that is because I needed it to match up with what I did earlier, which we were actually using pixel measurements instead. So that's why. Actually, oh yeah. So this is a 14 pixel font. So let's go ahead and say that everything inside the UL has a font size of 14px. I could add this font size of 14px to the list items instead, or even the, well, not the links inside them because I want to apply them to the non-link welcome Jeffrey text as well. But it really is up to you where you want to apply that text font size. It doesn't really concern me either way. Yeah, but 0.35 em of 14 pixel of this color text. So I think what we can do is say that every list item is going to have a padding of 0.35 em. Note the space here. It's very important. It's not 0.35 em. It's 0 on the top and the bottom, and it's 0.35 em on the left and the right. Okay. Furthermore, there seems to be a little border in between each of these guys. Now, you might think, oh, I can just hack that in just by using the pipe character on my keyboard, shift \. No, you don't want to do that. You don't use shift. You don't use pipe. This is not an ASCII site. This is a CSS site. So we use borders to distance the guys out from one another. So what we can simply do is say that every list item has a border right of 1 pixel solid. I think the color is 002344. And there we go. Now, what was the problem? What problem just happened when I did that? There's a border here, there's a border there, and there's a border at the end, right? So how do we fix that? We can fix it pretty easily. Looks like this. Okay, I just did some wacky stuff. This is the first part of this entire CSS file that is not valid CSS. It's valid Sass, but not valid CSS. In CSS, you're not allowed to nest rules. You can't put a selector inside another selector. In Sass, you can. For SCSS, you can. What this is going to compile into is 2 separate rules, header li, and then header li : last child. Where I use this ampersand here, it's called the parent selector. Again, only available in Sass. The parent selector essentially takes whatever's on top of it and replaces that with it. So we're essentially saying header li : last child. Not header li space : last child. Not the last child of something inside the li, but if the li itself is a last child. What I mean by that is, notice that it's gone, because I reloaded the page. You'll see that the rule is header li : last child, border right is 0. See? So that's what happens when you use the ampersand parent selector. It simply just takes this and puts it right there. And of course, that only works if you've nested it inside a larger selector. Last child is what's known as a pseudo class. Other pseudo classes include hover, click, hover, active, focused, visited, active. Did I say active? I already said active. Last child means that it has the state of being the last element in the list of things. This is different than being a pseudo element like before or after, because those refer to other elements, new elements on the page, whereas a pseudo class refers to something on the page that has a current status, has a current state, such as being the last child of a series of elements. So last child, border right 0, causes this final list item to not have a border on the right and only borders in between them. Excellent. Last thing that we have to do with our header is do the proper spacing. Looks like there's 0.5 em above the logo. There's 0.5 em between the logo, but I didn't actually specify that. And there's 0.5 em underneath the UL there. So let's go ahead and apply 5 em of padding to the header itself. Oops, sorry. Header itself. Padding, 0.5 em, 0. All right, so
I'll
let him finish. Okay, so we now have 0.5 em on the top, but we have more than 0.5 em on the bottom here. Why is that? Where did all that space just come from? Well, remember that margins, vertical margins, overflow. Now that we have padding on this header here, the vertical margin of this UL is no longer is no longer overflowing outside of its container, or its container. So we need to get rid of that margin on the UL, or we need 0.5 em of margin in between this UL and the heading, So let's just go ahead and say that the header UL has a margin of 0.5 em, 0, 0. This is shorthand for saying margin top 0.5 em, margin left 0, margin right 0, and margin bottom 0. By specifying 3 values, we're saying top, left, right, bottom.
Most of the categories require you to be homeless. Get on the list. And you can find a list.
So there we go. There's our finished header. Good stuff.
Is this from 38 years ago?
By the way, this is kind of a newbie thing that I experience sometimes. People don't know whether to use margin or padding. People don't know whether to apply padding to a parent or padding to a child to pad itself away from its parent. The answer is, it usually doesn't matter. I would probably err on the side of trying to add padding as high up the chain as possible and make it so elements only need to space themselves away from each other if they're siblings using margin or padding or whatever. Which one to use, margin or padding, doesn't really make that much difference, but they do behave slightly differently. The biggest difference, of course, is that padding is inside a container, so if a container itself has color, then that padding is going to be the color, but the margin is not because it's going to be outside the box, which provides the color. Spacing between elements, if you have margin on the top, margin on the bottom, that margin is going to overlap between the two elements. So there's certain things to keep in mind, but if you just keep a few of those things in mind, it's not the worst thing in the world. Sometimes there is no real, answer whether you should use margin or padding. Like in this case, I could have used padding top instead of margin top. But it was easier for me to use margin because I had to undo the margin of that UL anyway, so I might as well have just redefined margin. It's just, sort of a time-saving maneuver. Yep. Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and, a few more things to note. You might notice that I have used the color 002344 twice in this document here. It's here and it's here. We're starting to see that there's a little bit of a color theme going on here, that the designer has decided that there's only a few actual colors to be used throughout this document. As the developer, you should start to notice that and start to define these colors using variables so you don't have to have them multiple times throughout your CSS. That can result, that's duplication, of course, which can result in you accidentally typoing a color and using the slightly wrong one, or if the color needs to be changed, having to change it in multiple places, and you don't want that. So let's go ahead at the very top and define our first variable in Sass. We're going to call it navy. And navy is 002344. This is what a variable looks like in Sass. And now we can use the variable $navy wherever we were previously using that color. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to go for another 15 minutes and then I'll cut it off for the week. 1px solid navy, background navy. Okay? All right, no changes, but at least our code's a little bit cleaner. Oh, I should also note, one thing I forgot is the text welcome Jeffrey is the wrong color. Right here I specified that everything inside the header should be 14px font, 00344, link 7782b5. So let's color those things correctly. The header should have a color of, I'm sorry, not the header H1, but the header should have a color of navy. Everything inside the header, any text should be navy. But fonts, I'm sorry, but links inside the header should have a color of 7782b5. Uh-oh. I think that's a mistake. Yeah, that's a mistake. That's a mistake I made in my own mockup. It's not 7782b5, it's actually 77a2b5. Why do I know that? Because it's used here, it's used down here, it's used in a whole bunch of other different places. This was just a typo on my part, which I have to change, I have to fix. Note to self. But I think that I'm possibly already using this in multiple places. Oh, no, I'm not. I will very shortly, but I'm not yet. So 77A to B5. Oh, and finally, throughout the site, it looks like there are no underlines on any of the hyperlinks. These links up here, these links, this link, these links down at the bottom, no underlines. So we can write a rule up here at the top saying that all A's have a text decoration of none. Get rid of the underline. Obviously, the default value is text decoration underline. All right, no more underlines. There we go. Now I think my header is done. Okay, next up, let's work on the nav. Nav. Okay, let's write right here, nav. It looks like the UL inside the nav. Oh, actually, okay. I just realized something. Sorry, before continuing, another sassy thing. Another thing that I noticed that I'm duplicating is the word header multiple times. Header here, header here, header here, header here, header here. I can fix that. I don't have to say the word header over and over. I can nest these rules inside just header. So watch what I'm doing here. I'm going to cut this. See what I've got highlighted? I started at H1. I went down there, and I'm going to paste that inside header. I'm going to take this UL, cut this, and paste it inside header. Indentation is very important. It's not necessary, but it's very important for you to remember that you're not just styling in a UL, you're styling the UL inside the header. So please take note of indentation, it's important. LI goes inside the header as well. And now we have something nested inside something else that's nested. See? Header, LI, last child. And then finally, A inside header. I should note that you might notice that I am saying that every A inside the header has a color of 77A2B5. But isn't that overly broad? Isn't it really just the A inside the UL inside the LI? Since I have a rule for UL, shouldn't I put the rule for LI inside UL? Shouldn't I put the rule for A inside LI? The answer is you don't have to. There's no reason that you would need to. There's no reason that you need to be overly nesting in your CSS. It comes as, it's obvious. It is the only possible way that the only place that you'll find an LI is inside a UL, or in some cases an LI. So if you need to differentiate between the two, great. But if you don't, there's no reason for you to have to put this LI rule inside this UL rule. So just because you can nest in SAS doesn't mean you should. See what I mean? So header UL, header H1, header UL, header LI, header A, instead of header UL, LI, A. Not necessary. Okay, so next, nav. Inside nav, we've got a UL. The UL has a display of flex. Oh, I'm sorry, no it doesn't. The UL is not currently display flex because everything's stacked on top of each other. So I take that back. Let's see what it looks like currently. Okay. We probably want to change the colors on these hyperlinks. So nav A is going to have a color of 77A2B5, right? But since we're using it here and here, let's go ahead and create a name for that color. I'm going to call it sky blue. Sky blue 77A2B5. Let's go down here and replace this one with sky blue and this one with sky blue. Great. Next up, it looks like every A is centered. So now here's the thing. What am I thinking? Yeah, never mind. Okay, every A is centered, but every A currently is inline. So in order for them to remain, in order for us to be able to center the A, we need to apply centering to whatever block element contains it. If you said something like text align center, it would not work. Try that and go back over here and see what happens. Each one of these A's is still on the left despite being text align center. That's because text align center applies to this box. You see how I'm hovering over home and it's drawing a box around home? It is now centered within that box. But of course the box is the width of home, so you're not going to see any difference, right? So you need to apply the text align center to whatever block element contains that inline element, which in this case is li. So it's going to look like nav li text align center. Great. And finally, the last thing we have to do is specify, oh, I haven't specified specific padding in between each one of these guys. Rather, I specified that each one of these guys is 36 pixels tall. Now, I'm going to do something special here. Instead of saying that each list item is 36 pixels tall, I'm going to say that every A is 36 pixels tall. It's not exactly going to work, but I also don't want to use, I'm sorry, no, it will work. I don't want to use height in this case. Rather, instead of height, I want to use line height. And let's talk about why I'm using that. When I use line height, what happens to the text is that it takes up more vertical space and, in essence, aligns the text in the middle of that line. Every line of text now is going to take up 36 pixels of height. It's not going to be I'm not changing the font size. I'm changing the height from the top to the bottom of the actual line of text. So it really kind of determines the amount of, not really spacing in between lines, but how tall an actual line is. The reason I'm doing that in this case is because it makes it so the space above the A and below the A, well, actually, no, it doesn't. I was going to say that it makes it so that the space above and below the A is clickable, but given that it's an inline element, I guess that's not really working. It's still kind of doing what I want. The li seems to be somehow inheriting its child's line height, but I don't know, whatever. But I'll get back to that later. The idea is that it's kind of doing what I want. It's spacing them out the proper way. Later on, I think we'll add additional styling to this to make each one of these guys a little bit more clickable, make the target area of these a little bit more than just the word home. Like we'll be able to add some spacing around it. Why don't I just do that right now? Okay, the answer to that is just make them display block. Great. And actually, having done that, I can now add text align center to the A instead, because now that A is a block element, the inline text inside it will become centered. So display block makes it into a big old thing. Line height makes it do what I want. And now, caution, the entire area is now clickable. If you click all the way over here to the right of about, all the way over here to the left of about, it will still take you to about. Maybe that's good, maybe that's not. If you don't like that, you can give each one of these like a max width of something and then use margin 0 auto to align them so the clickable area doesn't stretch all the way across. But whatever, I want my stuff to be clickable, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. There's a bit of spacing in between the header and what's below it. That's because the UL inside this nav has margin. So I'm going to go ahead and say nav UL margin 0. Great. By the way, that seems to have had the similar effect of these elements down here also being aligned with the center and everything. That's because that's what I said, because that's a nav down there, right? The only difference is that the spacing is different. It's 5M on the top and the bottom, rather than there being a line height difference. But I think we can get to that later. Let me see here. It's 9:41, so I think I'm going to stop. Next week, we're going to work on styling this guy here. Cool, yes, thank you, I'm glad. This is why I do this class at the very end, because it pulls all the content we learned about kind of together into one thing, at least the CSS portion, and to a certain extent the HARP, kind of pre-processing. Cool, so yeah, we're going to get this to be, have a nice sky background. We're going to apply a whole bunch of cool CSS3 features to give this thing a shadow and make this button styled as we expect it to be, et cetera, et cetera. And if we have time, we'll go ahead and make this entire thing responsive. If we don't have time, I might consider extending this into 3 weeks because I think it is important to sort of get this thing finished. Or failing that, if I don't feel like it would be conducive to a 3rd week of instruction, maybe we can just do the finishing touches in lab the week of that class. So again, no class next week because it's Memorial Day. No lab next week because I usually don't do lab on weeks that I don't have classes. So the next class will meet on June 6th. Let's just double check. Yeah, I'll be here. And yeah, so June 6th is the next class. Remember to vote on June 7th. I'll say that on June 6th. Cool. I think that's it. Thanks for coming. I will be here on Thursday. We can talk about this. We can talk about anything else. As usual, thanks for coming. Don't donate to NoiseBridge, especially if it's your first time and you haven't been donating regularly. Just click this little guy here, and click this guy here, and click this guy here, recurring donation, and you can go ahead and do that. Wow, nice, great. So thanks for coming. See you guys on Thursday. Not in this room, but in the room right behind me, the Turing classroom at 7 p.m. until 9. I'll be here sitting. I will be giving out an assignment. It's sort of a quiz assignment on how to align a whole bunch of boxes in certain areas using as few CSS properties as possible. So it's a bit of a challenge. And the challenge is your knowledge of the box model and positioning and floating. And not Flexbox because I wrote the assignment before I started using Flexbox and I'm lazy. So there's that. Cool. See you guys on Thursday.
Please clap.